that remember or have heard even about your own sighting, that dramatic sighting that you had. And it would be maybe nice, since we're talking about some historic sightings at this point, to mention what happened to your sighting. That would be very...
I'd love to talk about that. They can read my written account. I've written down all my sighting reports, and they're posted to my website. I think I've had 5 or perhaps 6 sightings of very, very unusual objects or unusual events in my lifetime. But the first one was probably the most dramatic. I was seated in our family car at a drive-in theater on the south edge of St. Louis Airport. We were in the town of St. Anne, I happen to know. That's a town just on the south side of Lambert Field. One night, my father had to work at the airport, and we dropped him off, and we drove. My mother and older brother and I drove around to the south side of the airport to watch the theater. I wish I remembered the title of the movie, because that would allow me to pin down the date a little more carefully. But we were watching the movie, and suddenly a disturbance started brewing in the theater. It was almost as if there were a fight or a fire or somebody was injured, because people were getting out of their cars and they were shouting and they were running off to our right. And we didn't know what the problem was, but I casually glanced out the right side of our family car, which was a 1953 Studebaker, which gives me some hint as to when the date of the event was. And I saw an object that was blood red. It was fire engine red with perhaps a little bit of orange in it. It was bigger than the size of a full moon in the night sky. And it looked very much, in terms of its shape, it looked very much like the CBS logo that is a takeoff on the human eye, sort of an oval-shaped object with somewhat sharpened points. And I watched that for just a few seconds. It was moving very, very slowly. If it had been moving any more slowly, I don't think I would have been able to perceive movement at all. And while I was watching it off to the right side of the car, it accelerated at a blistering pace, and it covered about 120 or 130 degrees of arc, I now estimate, and disappeared behind McDonnell Aircraft Corporation. And it went from 90 degrees to my right to about 10 degrees to my left, 120 degrees or thereabouts, in about 2 seconds. And it followed an S-shaped curve across the sky. And even as a young boy, because my father was in the airline business, perhaps, I prided myself in my ability to identify almost any kind of aircraft in the sky. I could tell a DC-6 from a DC-7 just by the sounds of their engines as they approached the airport. And this was like nothing I had ever seen. The incident scared my mother very badly. From that point forward, she was always a little uncomfortable in discussing UFOs. My father was in the control tower on the north side of St. Louis Airport at that time, and he saw it, and all the control operators saw it as well, and they couldn't figure out what it was. So it was a very dramatic event. And the interesting thing, there are many interesting facets to it, Michael, but one thing I'd like to mention is there must have been certainly hundreds of people in that theater, possibly even thousands. And there's only one person who has ever reported it, at least in our database, and that is I. It reinforces my long-standing suspicion that we haven't captured even 1 out of 1,000, maybe 1 out of 10,000 sighting reports from adult, competent, clear-thinking Americans who believe they've seen a UFO in their lifetime. So there's a lot of work to be done in this field.
Well, that is just a fascinating story. My goodness. I got to ask, Peter, were you in your footy pajamas in the car, or were you that young?
No, I was 6.5 years of age in 1954, and I'm sure I had my jeans on and my cowboy boots, and that was my preferred means of dress back then.
Yeah.
But
Oh, those drive-in movie theaters are just a thing of the past, but how nostalgic it would be to be in your shoes, your boots, in that car, and the 1953 Studebaker. Oh my gosh, what a classic automobile! And watching an outdoor movie at a movie theater, when all of a sudden you have the most dramatic sighting of your lifetime, and then your father coincidentally is in the air traffic control tower at the local airport seeing the same thing. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And they looked at it with binoculars, even though the object was so bright that it was made me a little uncomfortable to look at it. I had to avert my eyes. I couldn't stare at it constantly. And it suddenly, when I say it accelerated abruptly, it was like a marble coming out of a slingshot, a bullet coming out the end of a rifle barrel. It just went from sitting still to moving at a very high angular velocity. And it disappeared from sight within 2 seconds, covering, I would say, I'm estimating the elapsed time, but it dipped down and then it rose up and it dipped down again, went behind the movie theater, and disappeared over the horizon to the north. All of that happened in maybe 2 or 3 seconds.
Man, talk about a stunning observation for the people there in that drive-in theater. Oh my gosh, people would have been talking about that for months afterwards, I'm sure. But no one reported it, and thank God you did.
Yep. And it makes me wonder just how many similar incidents have occurred, Michael, about which we, even UFO investigators, know absolutely nothing because people have not taken the time to write it down, the details of it, even just one paragraph, and report their respective sightings. And it may be a boon that we haven't gotten all that information, because that would vastly increase my workload, and I'm already working at about 110% of capacity now.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for going through that, because I know you don't do that often, but I think our listeners would be are very grateful to be able to get that background of where you came from and what motivates you so much to be doing this all these years at the helm of the National UFO Reporting Center. By the way, we're going to get into some more reports, whatever you've got left here for the next 8 minutes or so. But I thought maybe we should do this now instead of at the end, and give people your P.O. Box address again in case they're out there and wanting to be a little magnanimous here this year, and send a few bucks to the National UFO Reporting Center to help you, defray some of these costs that you have to have, the phone bill, the travel expenses and all that stuff. I know you're coming to a conference here very shortly, and we're going to talk about that too. But how about telling them how they can actually get a hold of you and send you a check if they want to?
Well, thank you very much for that. If they have a UFO sighting to report, I'd encourage them to call the hotline, area code 206-722-3000. That's 206-722-3000. But we try to limit the use of that hotline to reports within the last week or so. And invariably, I invite people to submit written reports, as I described a few minutes ago, using our online report form, which is on our website at ufocenter.com. And thank you for mentioning the issue of contributions to New Fork, or the National UFO Reporting Center. If they'd like to send us a few shekels, they can send us a check, and our mailing address in Eastern Washington is P.O. Box 700, Davenport, Washington, Davenport, Washington, and the zip code is 99122. So we welcome contributions, even small contributions. They help us tremendously in paying the phone bill and the website costs and all of the innumerable costs we have to get this data out to the public that's interested in the UFO phenomenon.
Yes, definitely. Well, I'd encourage everyone to just do that as a matter of course, periodically from month to month or once a year, whatever you could do. But we've got enough time for a couple more sighting reports if you've got some.
Yeah, I'd like to present just a couple that I've been talking about here recently in the last several days on other radio programs. One comes from July of 1986 from Seattle, from your neck of the woods, Michael. A gentleman writes that in 1986, he was 13 years of age, and he was camped outside, I presume in the backyard of his home with his good friend of same age, and they were lying on the ground looking up at the night sky. It was about midnight, he estimates, and they saw a golden-colored disc or sphere move right above them, headed from east to west. And the interesting thing about the location and the direction of the object is they were just less than a mile, camped less than a mile to the east of SeaTac Airport. So that object that went over them, and it was very close to them, by the way, he estimates that it was scuffing the tops of the tree branches in their yard. It was moving very slowly, 1 to 2 miles an hour. They both estimated, that it was probably 20 feet or thereabouts in diameter. And interestingly, it was moving at, he estimated 1 to 2 miles an hour directly west, which means it was moving directly towards Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Very interesting report.
Wow. Yeah, right there next to SeaTac Airport. Some young guys are camping in their backyard seeing this massive thing coming low. Now, that's interesting how low it was. Maybe it was avoiding the radar from SeaTac as well, being that low.
Interesting to consider whether it might have been doing that. But this gentleman writes a very nice report. I have a bias. I assume that people who write well and are well organized are mentally well organized, and that's a good sign from a witness. Another report, just briefly, comes from much more recently. This is the 7th of February, this month. 7th was a Thursday night. A mother submitted a report on behalf of her daughter, age 15, and the daughter reported to her mother that on that Thursday night down in Silverton, Oregon, which is just east of the capital city of Salem, the daughter was out feeding her 2 horses with her dog. She was accompanied by her dog or the family dog, and she noted that the animals were becoming very ill at ease, very skittish. The dog wanted to head back apparently to the farmhouse, and the horses were very agitated, which was unusual at feeding time because they usually calm down when they're about to get food, according to the daughter. But the daughter became aware of something above her, and again, like the last case near SeaTac that I just reported on, the girl's impression was that something was bumping into the tops of surrounding trees, in this case oak trees. And she looked up and saw a totally dark black object, indistinct because of absence of light, and it had no navigation lights on it, so it could not have been a terrestrial aircraft of any kind flying legally at any rate. And it scared the daylights out of this young gal. Her mother submitted the report, as I mentioned earlier, and I requested that the mother have her daughter write down her own report. and submit a second supplementary report